Hello, I'm Kelly. Read Zootopia with me. Let's begin. Chapter 1. Welcome to Zootopia. Judy was the smallest animal at Zootopia Police Academy, but that didn't stop her. For months, she worked hard. Every day, she studied, she ran, and she climbed. She wanted to be the best police officer in Zootopia. By the end of her time at Zootopia Police Academy, Judy was the best student in her class. Assistant Mayor Bellwether gave Judy her badge and said, "It is a real proud day for us little guys." Her family were happy, but they were worried too. Her dad told her to be careful near foxes in the city. It was Judy's first day in the capital city, Zootopia. She walked down the street and looked at the crowds of animals everywhere. There were big animals, small animals, loud animals, and quiet animals. Everyone lived together happily. Every animal was equal. It was very different than her home. Judy's family lived on a farm in the country. Her mom and dad were carrot farmers. Judy was the first rabbit in her family to live in the city, and the first police officer rabbit too. The next day, Judy started work at the ZPD, the Zootopia Police Department. The other police officers were much bigger than Judy, but she didn't mind. She listened carefully to Chief Bogle and took notes with her carrot pen. Chief Bogle explained that 14 animals were missing from the city. Chief Bogle was worried. Where were they? They might be lost or in trouble. Judy was excited. She wanted to help. She said to Chief Bogle, "I was top of my class at the police academy." But Chief Bogle wanted Judy to write traffic tickets for cars. Judy was not pleased. She knew she was a good police officer. Judy decided to work hard and show Chief Bogle that she was the bravest officer in Zootopia. Judy was writing a traffic ticket when she saw a fox in an ice cream store for big animals. That was strange. Why was a fox in there? She heard the fox say to the elephant, "I'm not looking for any trouble. I just want a jumbo pop for my little boy." "Can't you go to a fox ice cream store?" replied the elephant. The fox explained that his son loved elephants and jumbo pops. The fox's son was crying. Judy was angry. She explained that she was a police officer. She told the elephant to sell a jumbo pop to the fox. The elephant wasn't happy, but finally he agreed. The fox thanked Judy, but then he realized that he didn't have any money. Judy felt bad, so she bought the popsicle for the fox. Outside, the fox said, "Officer, I can't thank you enough. So kind." The fox said his name was Nick. Judy told the little boy, "You can be an elephant if you want. In Zootopia, anyone can be anything." Chapter 2. Criminals in the City. That afternoon, Judy was working in the city when she saw Nick and his son again. Judy watched them make the large jumbo pop into a lot of smaller popsicles, and now he was selling them. This was wrong. Also, the other fox wasn't his son. He wasn't even young. He could drive a car. Nick and his friend weren't honest. In fact, they were criminals. Judy's mom and dad always said that she should be careful around foxes. Now Judy thought that they might be right. Judy ran after Nick. She wanted answers. Nick understood that Judy had a dream for being a city police officer, but he didn't think it would happen. He thought she would go back to the country and become a carrot farmer. "No one tells me what I can or can't be," shouted Judy. Nick replied, "You can only be what you are," and in his opinion, rabbits were stupid. Judy shouted that she was not stupid. She tried to follow Nick, but she couldn't move her feet. "You'll never be a real police officer," said Nick. The next day, a thief robbed flowers from a flower store. Judy followed the thief into Little Rodentia. Judy and the thief were much bigger than the mice who lived there. Cars had to stop suddenly. Mice ran left and right, escaping Judy's big feet. Finally, Judy caught the thief, and she took him to Chief Bogle. "Sir, I got the bad guy. That's my job." Judy thought that Chief Bogle would be happy with her. He was not. He was angry about the trouble in Little Rodentia. "Your job is putting tickets on parked cars." Chapter 3. Where is Mr. Otterton? Suddenly, the door opened. "Chief Bogle, please," said a sad voice. "My husband has been missing for 10 days. His name is Emmett Otterton. He has a flower store and 2 beautiful children. He would never just disappear." Judy jumped up. "I will find him." Mrs. Otterton was grateful and gave Judy a photo of Mr. Otterton. "Take this, find my Emmett." Then Deputy Mayor Bellwether arrived. She was happy that Judy was helping Mrs. Otterton. Chief Bogle was unhappy. "I will give you 48 hours. That's 2 days to find Emmett Otterton. If Judy failed, she would leave the office." Judy didn't have much information about Mr. Otterton. She looked closely at the only photo of him. She noticed that in the photo he was eating one of Nick's popsicles. Judy found Nick. At first, Nick didn't want to help, but finally he agreed. Together, they discovered that a big white car took Mr. Otterton. It was night when they found the car. When they opened the door, they saw that inside it was messy and there was fur everywhere. Judy found a photo of Mr. Otterton in the car. "What do you think happened?" asked Judy. It didn't look good for Mr. Otterton. Judy needed more information. Nick and Judy found the driver of the car, Mr. Manchus. She slowly opened the door a little. Judy saw he was hurt and scared. She said, "We just want to know what happened to Emmett Otterton." He replied, "You should be asking what happened to me." Then Mr. Manchus described what happened to Mr. Otterton. Mr. Otterton was sitting quietly in the car. Suddenly, he became wild. He walked on 4 legs. He shouted about the night howlers again and again. Night howlers? What were night howlers? Judy wanted to know more. They waited for Mr. Manchus to open the door. But then they heard strange noises coming from inside the house. Judy carefully pushed open the door. "Are you okay?" she asked. The driver turned his head and looked at them with fierce eyes. He was wild, like Mr. Otterton. "Run, run!" shouted Judy as Mr. Manchus jumped at them. He followed them outside, running on 4 legs. Judy and Nick were frightened. At last, Judy locked Mr. Manchus to a streetlight. But then, Judy and Nick fell through the jungle trees below. Chapter 4. Night Howlers. Chief Bogle arrived. Judy explained that Mr. Otterton didn't just disappear. He was wild. But he didn't believe her. She took Chief Bogo to the street lamp. But Mr. Manchus wasn't there. Chief Bogo was angry with Judy. "Badge," he shouted, holding out his hand. But then Nick stopped him. "No." "What did you say, Fox?" replied Chief Bogo. Nick explained. "You gave Officer Hobbs 48 hours to find Mr. Otterton, and we still have 10 hours left." Then he and Judy left together. Judy was surprised that Nick was helping her. Maybe foxes weren't so bad after all. "Thank you," she said quietly. Nick explained that other animals were mean to him because he was a fox. Chief Bogo was mean to Judy because she was a rabbit. He understood how Judy felt. As they talked, Nick looked down at the traffic below them. Suddenly, he had a great idea. They could look at the city's traffic cameras to find the driver. Perhaps Deputy Mayor Bellwether could help them. They arrived at Zootopia Town Hall and heard Mayor Lionheart shouting at Deputy Mayor Bellwether. "I'm going out." He was very rude to her. Deputy Mayor Bellwether was happy to help them. Together, they looked at the traffic cameras. A group of wolves found Mr. Manchus locked to the streetlight. They took him and put him in a trunk. Then one of the wolves howled. "That's it," thought Judy. Wolves howl at night, so night howlers must mean wolves. If the wolves took Mr. Manchus, maybe they took Mr. Otterton too. They followed the truck on the cameras. It drove out of the city and stopped at Cliffside Asylum. Nick and Judy raced there. A group of wolves were guarding the gates, but Judy had a great idea. She hid behind the gates and howled. Soon, all the wolf guards were howling too. The guards were so busy howling, they didn't see Judy and Nick pass through the gate and enter Cliffside Asylum. Nick smiled at Judy. She was a smart rabbit. Chapter 5. Inside Cliffside Asylum. Cliffside Asylum was dark, but Nick and Judy were brave, and they went inside. They found what they wanted, Mr. Otterton and Mr. Manchus. In the past, Cliffside Asylum was a hospital, but now it was a prison. They found poor Mr. Otterton in a cage. There were other animals in the cages. Judy counted them. 11, 12, 13, 14. All the missing animals were there, and they were all wild. What happened to these animals? Why were they wild? Suddenly, the door opened, so Judy and Nick jumped into an empty cage and hid. Mayor Lionheart came into the room with a doctor. Judy recorded the conversation on her phone. The mayor shouted at the doctor. "Enough! I don't want excuses. Doctor, I need answers." "Mayor Lionheart, please," replied the doctor. "We're doing everything we can." Mayor Lionheart pointed to the wild animals in the cages. He didn't think the doctor was doing enough. The doctor explained that all the wild animals were predators. "We cannot keep it a secret." Mayor Lionheart didn't agree. He thought it should stay a secret because he was a predator too. Then Judy's parents called her. Ding, ding, ding. Mayor Lionheart heard the cell phone. "Someone's here," he shouted. The wolf guards were arriving. Nick and Judy needed to escape, but they were in a cage with no way out. Judy looked around the cage, then asked Nick, "Can you swim?" "What? Can I swim?" "Yes, I can swim. Why?" asked Nick. Judy pointed to the large toilet. They fell down the toilet until splash. They hit the lake. At first, Nick couldn't find Judy in the water. He was worried, then shouted out her name. Then he found her, and she still had her phone. Judy told Chief Bogle about Cliffside Asylum. The police arrived at the secret prison, where they found Mayor Lionheart and the doctor and the missing animals. As Judy took Mayor Lionheart away, he said to her, "You don't understand. I was trying to protect the city." But Judy didn't believe him, and she replied angrily, "You were trying to protect your job." "Listen," he said. "We still don't know why this is happening. We thought it could be the end of Zootopia." Chapter 6. A New Mayor. Everybody wanted to know about the wild animals found at Cliffside Asylum. First, Chief Bogle said thank you to Judy. Then Judy answered the crowd's questions. They wanted to know why it was happening. Judy explained that all the wild animals were predators. They didn't know exactly why it was happening, but maybe it was because they were predators. Many years ago, predators attacked weaker prey animals, and now it was happening again. It was important for everybody to be careful. Judy stopped answering questions and returned to Nick. "That went so fast," she said. Nick replied, "Oh, I think you said plenty." He couldn't believe what Judy said to the crowd. Foxes were predators too. Did Judy think he was dangerous? Judy said, "You're not like them." "Oh, visit them now?" said Nick. "You know what I mean. You're not that kind of predator," replied Judy. "Let me ask you a question. Are you scared of me?" asked Nick. "Do you think I might try to eat you?" Nick walked away. He felt sad and angry. Everyone in Zootopia was scared. Prey animals were afraid of predators. Neighbors fought each other. Life in the city became terrible. The new mayor, Mayor Bellwether, wanted to meet with Judy and Chief Bogle. She thought Judy could help prey animals in Zootopia feel less nervous. Judy replied sadly, "I came here to make the world a better place, but I think I broke it." "The world has always been broken. That's why we need good officers like you," said Chief Bogle. But Judy gave back her badge. She didn't think she was a good officer. Judy decided to leave Zootopia and go home to the country. She felt unhappy, but she tried to hide it from her parents. She was selling vegetables when suddenly her dad shouted at some young rabbits, "Hey, children, don't run through the blue flowers." Then a neighbor said, "My family always called them night howlers." Judy's dad explained that he grew the flowers because they kept insects away from his vegetables. Then he told Judy a story about one of her uncles. Years ago, her uncle ate one of the flowers and became wild. Chapter 7. Return to Zootopia. Night howlers? The flowers were called night howlers. Judy immediately jumped in the farm truck and drove back to the city. She found Nick. Night howlers weren't wolves. She told him that night howlers were flowers that made animals become wild. Someone was using the flowers on predators, but Nick didn't want to talk. He walked away. "Wait," Judy called out. "I know you'll never forgive me." Judy wanted to help the predators in Zootopia, but she couldn't do it without Nick. Nick turned and smiled at her. "Don't worry, they were friends again." Nick ate blueberries in the truck as Judy drove. Judy described that the thief who stole blue flowers in Little Rhodesia. The flowers might be night howlers. With Nick's help, they found the thief. The thief said he stole the flowers for a ram called Dog. The thief's information took them to a railroad under the city. They climbed inside the train and watched Dog the ram. He used night howler flowers to produce a blue serum. They listened to Dog talk on the phone. He described shooting Mr. Otterton with the night howler serum. Judy had to tell the police. Judy wanted to show the night howlers to the police. She decided to take the whole train to the police. When Doug wasn't looking, Judy pushed him out of the train. She ran to the front of the train and started to drive it. But some other rams ran after them. They jumped on the train, climbed on the roof, and jumped through a hole. The train moved faster and faster through the city into a station. The train was moving too fast. It was dangerous. Chapter 8. Judy finds the criminal. Nick and Judy jumped off the train. They reached the station platform just before the train hit a wall. Crash. Fire burned all the night howler flowers inside the train. Without the flowers, how could Judy tell the police what was happening? Nick smiled at her and pulled out a case behind his back. It was Dog's case. The dart and night howler serum was inside it. Judy laughed. Nick, yes, come on. We've got to get to the ZPD. Judy remembered there was a quicker way to the police station through the museum. She and Nick ran up some steps into the museum and raced toward the doors. Judy was surprised to hear someone calling her name. It was Mayor Bellwether and 2 guards. "We found out what's happening," said Judy. Mayor Bellwether listened as Judy explained. Someone was shooting predators with a serum. It made them go wild. "I'm so proud of you, Judy," replied Mayor Bellwether. As she reached for the case, something wasn't right. "How did you know where to find us?" Judy asked Mayor Bellwether. Mayor Bellwether tried to take the case, but Judy said, "Nick and I will take this to the ZPD." But when she and Nick turned around, they saw a big guard at the museum entrance. He didn't look very friendly. Nick and Judy both said, "Run!" And they escaped into the museum. "Get them," called Mayor Bellwether. She and the guards followed Judy and Nick through the museum. A guard knocked the case out of Nick's hand. Judy and Nick fell to the floor. Mayor Bellwether picked up the case and laughed. "It really is too bad. I did like you." Judy looked up at Mayor Bellwether and said, "What are you going to do? Kill me?" Mayor Bellwether replied, "No, of course not. He is." Then she shot Nick with the dart. It hit him in the neck, and he dropped to the floor. Judy ran to his side. Was he okay? She held him and said, "No, Nick, don't do this. Fight it." Mayor Bellwether phoned the police and told them there was a wild fox in the museum. "Officer Hobbs is down. Please hurry." Mayor Bellwether explained her plan. She wanted prey animals to be scared of predator animals. So that's it. Prey animals are afraid of predator animals. And you stay in power? That's the plan, replied Bellwether. I'll shoot every predator in Zootopia to keep it that way. It won't work, cried Judy. Suddenly, Nick jumped at Judy. He was wild. She ran away from him, but he ran after her. Mayor Bellwether looked down at them and smiled. Nick got closer and closer to Judy. He opened his mouth to bite her. His teeth were on her neck. Judy screamed loudly. Mayor Bellwether couldn't believe it when Judy stood up and started talking. Nick wasn't wild and Judy was okay. What was happening? Nick said to Mayor Bellwether, "Are you looking for the serum?" "Well, it's right here." Judy pointed at Mayor Bellwether's hand. "What you've got there? Those are blueberries from my family's farm," she explained. Nick laughed. "They are delicious. You should try some." Mayor Bellwether checked. Judy was right. Mayor Bellwether was angry now. "It's my word against yours." Judy smiled at Mayor Bellwether and then pulled out her carrot pen. The carrot pen could record what people said. Judy played it, and they all heard Mayor Bellwether say, "I'll shoot every predator in Zootopia to keep it that way." It's your word against yours. Judy was enjoying this. Now, Mayor Bellwether was really worried. She tried to escape, but when she turned around, she saw Chief Bogo with a team of police officers. They took Mayor Bellwether to prison. Chapter 9. A New Police Officer. Mayor Bellwether went to prison, and Lionheart came out of prison. He understood now that it was a mistake to lock up the wild predators. Slowly, things got better in the city. Prey and predators became friends again. There was more good news for Zootopia. Doctors found a medicine to help all the wild predators. Mr. Otterton woke up in the hospital. He wasn't wild now. He was nice Mr. Otterton again. Mrs. Otterton was very grateful to Judy. "Thank you," she said. Then an important day arrived. Judy stood in front of the other police officers and said, "When I was a young rabbit, I thought Zootopia was a perfect place. I thought everyone lived happily together. But real life is messy. We all make mistakes, but we have to try to understand each other. It doesn't matter what animal you are, from the biggest elephant to our first fox. Please try to make the world a better place." Then she gave Nick his badge. He was a police officer now, the first fox police officer in Zootopia.